Hi, everyone. My name's Kainwen, and I'm one of Shine's directors. And I'm really happy today to welcome you to this session, which is looking at end-of-life care and really how we can make sure that our wishes at the end of our life are understood and carried out. And so today I've got two great guests with me. I've got Rhiannon, and Rhiannon is 30 years old. She's a family law solicitor, and she's been a part of our Shine Plus Ones network since March 2019. Her husband, Simon, was diagnosed with bowel cancer in 2018 and very sadly passed away later on in 2019 after Rhiannon had joined Plus Ones, but she's still a part of our community. And she's going to be telling us a little bit about her experience of Simon's death. And then we're also joined by Sarah Malik. And Sarah is the nurse at Compassion in Dying, which is an organization she'll tell us a little bit more about. But she also has a background in oncology and hematology nursing, but she's worked in the charity sector for about 10 years. So thank you guys both so much for being here. Rhiannon, I'm going to go to you first. So tell me a little bit about, where you were in your life with Simon back in 2018 when he was diagnosed, and then what happened.
Sure, thank you so much for having me. So Simon was diagnosed, as you said, in April 2018, and it was literally 2 months after we bought our first house. So he was 5 years older than me, so I was in my late 20s. Everything was very much going to plan. And we just moved into this property that needed loads of work doing to it. And then spanner in the works, he was diagnosed with stage 3 rectal cancer. And we always knew that it was quite an aggressive cancer, and he had chemotherapy to start with, and then some chemo with radiotherapy, with the aim really to stop it becoming stage 4, and also to make it easier to operate on. But unfortunately, none of that treatment worked. So by the time we were talking about surgery, unfortunately, his cancer had become locally advanced. So the options at that point were either to do nothing, or to have quite a radical surgery to remove all the organs in his pelvis and keep our fingers crossed. So he took that option and had this major surgery, which must have prolonged his life, but unfortunately only by 6 months. So the cancer came back after, I think, 3 months post-op, and no more treatment was offered to him at that point. And then he died 3 months after that, and spent the last 3 weeks of his life living in our local hospice. So he died in June 2019, nearly 2.5 years ago.
Wow. So when he decided to have that kind of major surgery, and then obviously I guess it made him cancer free for a few months, but the cancer came back. When the cancer came back, what kind of conversations did his medical team have with him about what that meant for him and for you both?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's one of the things that I do feel grateful for, is that conversation we did have with them was very, very honest. And I know that a couple of other family members who were there found that very difficult. Still a bit annoyed with how brutally honest the surgeon was with us. But I personally am really grateful for it, because there was no uncertainty. It was definite. It was the end. There was nothing more that they could offer, and that was that. And we needed that information, and we made decisions based on it, and decisions that I'm really, really pleased that we did make, because it meant that I immediately stopped working, and I spent every day with him then until he died. And also just the conversations that we had with them about how long he might have also made us move our wedding forward by a really, really big chunk, and that made a huge difference as well, because he was actually well for it. So it enabled us to make a lot of decisions, and it also meant that at that point they referred us to the palliative care team, and then through that we managed to get contacted or communicated with the hospice, and that just made the biggest difference to our whole experience. I still speak to, I think some people wonder why I'm still part of the Plus Ones community, and I have myself at times as well. But what I I'm finding is that when people are in this situation and they don't have information or where they've got nowhere to turn, that I am able to say to them, look, don't be terrified of palliative care as a term. Please don't be terrified of going to a hospice and talking to them, because they actually, Simon's condition improved when he got admitted to the hospice. They call it jokingly there the Sue Ryder effect. Yeah, and it's because, you know, the staff there focus so much on you as an individual, what is best for you, and on living. You know, I've never been somewhere that is about, I suppose, colloquially in the public eye, about death, but it's so much about living and living the best that you possibly can for as long as you possibly can. And, you know, they're not, there's only 16 beds in this hospice, so we were really, really lucky, and it made a real difference to the care that he had.
Yeah, I know. I actually, because I've had my own cancer diagnosis, when I was recovering, went to a hospice for physiotherapy and counseling and that kind of thing. And they had a drinks trolley they rolled out every morning about 11. I'd be going there for physio, and they're like, "Would you like a sherry?" You know, which was lovely. I didn't usually take it, but it was just kind of nice to see how they were really embracing.
Oh, I drank a lot in the hospice.
So tell me, how did you, I guess, what were the good things about how that transition happened from getting Simon's diagnosis to being referred to palliative care in the hospice and then him dying? What worked well in that situation for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think mainly it's the fact that we had the honest conversation, so that we knew what was happening, and even though on the one hand you could say, God, that was a bit brutal, we needed to know the reality of the situation so that we could plan for it, or so that we could try and arrange our lives in a way that made sense for us, because the fact that they gave us that information enabled us to have 3 months where he was, you know, not well, but for a lot of it, he did have some really good times and really good days, because we weren't being given a slim hope of some treatment that might potentially work. We made decisions based on that. So it enabled him to say, do you know what, I don't want any more treatment. I just want to focus on the time that I've got left and enjoy it in the best way I possibly can. And again, then, because, and it was Maggie's actually that gave me the contact with the hospice. And even though that wasn't through the NHS and it was through other means, it meant that I actually had a specific contact. And I was talking to Sarah about this, when we were in situations in the hospital where, you know, his cancer was really quite complicated, and advanced cancer often is, some of the staff don't really know how to deal with that. And so the fact that I had a contact at the hospice made all the difference, because I actually rang him and I said, I really need your help here. They really don't know what to do with him. And he said, right, leave it with me. Which ward is he on? I'll ring them myself. And he was the one that actually got him the help that he needed in hospital, and then transferred us to the hospice the following day.
Wow. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, that's kind of interesting, like you say, the staff at the hospital didn't necessarily know what to do with Simon. So in that experience, I mean, obviously there were some good things and you were kind of glad for the openness of the conversation, but if you had to pick a few things that could be improved, what would you say there? You know, if someone's watching this thinking, right, I want to make sure I do have a smooth experience, or, you know, what do they need to look out for?
I think when you're going through treatment, and we found this, is we really had a lot of faith in our medical team, people looking after us. They'd always been honest with us, and they'd always given us options and given us all the information we needed. And so we thought, well, that's going to happen throughout, isn't it? So when it's time for us to think about what the end might look like they'll talk to us about it. And it never happened. They never explained in detail really what the end would look like. And I think it's because, you know, doctors are trained to cure. It's very, in general, a lot of them, I think, are quite afraid of talking about the nitty gritty, or talking about when it goes wrong, because they're not used to it. And what I found exacerbated the difficulties of that situation, because of course you're afraid. The person who is ill is afraid. The person looking after them is afraid, because you don't want this to be your reality. It's your worst nightmare. But the silence about death exacerbates that in my personal experience, because I needed to be the carer and the supporter that I wanted to be. I needed to know what would happen so that I could look after him properly, and so that I could reassure him that he didn't need to be afraid. And nobody told me, well, this is how it might happen. This is what death looks like. These might be the symptoms that he will experience, and this might be how we could help him. And that never happened. And I think on top of that, then, because it didn't happen, there wasn't the conversation with him of, well, where would you want to be? Who would you want looking after you? What kind of treatment would be acceptable to you, and what wouldn't be acceptable to you? And that conversation didn't happen. And I don't, speaking to Sarah, that seems to be something that is very common. I thought possibly it was more common because we were young. And I really did feel that the medical team, you could see it in their faces, the devastation that they couldn't cure him. Mm-hmm. And I think they found it so hard to talk to us about it, that the conversation didn't happen. And it's only it's only because, I suppose, my personality of being dogged about it, that some of the conversations did happen. And I took it into my own hands, and I did my own research, and I thought, well, whatever happens, I'm going to satisfy myself that I have a little bit of information so that I can try and help him.
And so did that change when you got to the hospice? Did you feel like the staff were better able to say, okay, if someone is approaching the actual end of their life, this is what might happen, this is what it might look like, this is what we can do? Or was it still kind of couched in mystery?
I would say far less mystery once we got to the hospice, but still something I had to raise. They were I think the key with them was that they were very in tune with him and his needs. And that was the key separator, I suppose, from being at home or being in hospital, is that they just have a much higher stash ratio to patient. They are also so focused on that particular individual. I think that's really what made the difference, is that they got to know me and they got to know him. And so when we were there, I just felt like I was spending time with him. Yeah.
So if you were talking to somebody who's maybe going through this right now, just in terms of I feel like top tips, is that, I don't know if that's the right, but kind of key takeaways, maybe. What would be the things that you would say to somebody in that situation, or maybe facing their own death? Say, okay, look, a few things that you want to look out for, conversations you want to have, information you want to know. Yeah, and I'm by no means an expert, but the other thing I say is that I suppose we're all facing our own death. The one thing now that I'm acutely aware of is that this is something that all of us are going to need to think about and deal with. Mm-hmm. And the more time that I've spent with other people in this situation, and the time that I spent with Simon, is that death, or the dying process, teaches you so much about life and living. And his death was the most devastating thing that's ever happened to me, and him, obviously. But it's taught me so much. It's taught me so much about what really, really matters. And if you are willing to have that conversation, or you want to have that conversation about the end of life and planning, doing it is a kindness. It's a kindness to your loved ones, because that might help them in the future. It helps them to know that what happens at the end of your life was in accordance with your wishes. It also helps you, as the person going through it, to be able to communicate those things. So I'd say, if you're a loved one and or a supporter, or a plus one, let's say, and the person you're supporting wants to have a conversation with you about, I don't know, maybe what they want for you once they've gone,
or what you want at the end of your life, and you think, oh God, I hate that conversation, I don't want to talk about it. The best thing you can do is maybe don't even react, just listen. Just let them get it off their chest, because then for them, it's done. And in the same way, if you're supporting somebody and you help them have that conversation, or if you're the person who's unwell, for example, and you think, oh God, I might be upsetting my loved ones here if I talk about it. Well, it's going to be upsetting, but it's also, it gives each of you the opportunity to know, well, we've done that now, we've talked about it, we can put that to one side, we've done it, let's just focus on the time we've got together. And what I think isn't spoken about very much is, of course, it's important to get the end of life right for the person whose life is ending. But it's really important to get it right for everyone who adore that, you know, and love that person, because when you are surviving that person and you're in grief, that can help, or it can also hinder. So you can spend time as a grieving person going over those last moments and thinking, was it what they wanted? Did we do it right? And you can torture yourself with it. So if you've had those conversations in advance, then you are really doing your loved one a kindness, not just now, but in the longer term as well. Yeah. Another thing that I'd alluded to before was that, you know, we didn't have people approaching us to have these conversations about end of life. And so what I really want to get across, I suppose, is that unfortunately you might find yourself having to advocate for this yourself. I would really encourage that you do, because you might not have doctors say to you, right, okay, let's have this conversation. But it's also okay for you, and please do feel able to ask those questions, even if it is, well, what if this treatment doesn't work? Or how might I die? And simply say it in those terms. Or what symptoms do I need to be aware of? And of course, it's absolutely fine if you don't want to be aware of them, absolutely. But if you do want to be aware of them, ask and advocate for yourself, because you are the expert in you, or you are the expert in your loved one that you are looking after. And however uncomfortable it makes your doctor, it's not as uncomfortable as what you're feeling, not knowing the answer to the question. You know, at the end of the day, it was moving that our medical team found it so upsetting, but it wasn't as upsetting for them as it was for us. Yeah. You know, so it's be your own advocate. You can, and try to seek out that information, because it's so hard to make informed choices about things if you don't have the information, and they can give it to you. And the other thing is that if you know you're in a situation where maybe you're not getting the information from doctors, or you don't want to have those conversations, there's so many resources available that I, for example, didn't know about. Sure. And would have helped me had I been signposted to them. You know, I've spent some time looking at compassion and dying just in this last week, and resources there that are amazing. So it's unfortunately, it's a matter of knowing where to look. But once you know where to look, there is a huge amount of information out there that can help. Yeah, Rhiannon, thank you for that, because I think that really touches on this idea that, you know, to get on with the business of living, you almost need to sort out your death. And I think that is good advice for anyone, whether you're kind of, you know, whether it's going to be sooner or later. We are all going to die, and we need to talk about that. So thank you for that. And you mentioned compassion in dying. Obviously, we've got Sarah here from Compassion in Dying. So Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. And I know you're a nurse, and you've been at Compassion in Dying for a few years, I think. And you've got a presentation for us.
Great. Thank you so much, Kynwen, for having me along today. So I'm really happy that you've invited me. And I must say, I've been really happy to get to know Rhiannon recently. I'm quite pleased, actually. I feel like she really echoes how I feel about end-of-life planning and what's important. So it's been really an honour to get to know her recently. I feel like she's a friend already. And I hope that this presentation, in follow-up to what she said, is helpful. That's sort of reinforcing, especially those things that could be done better. And I hope that some of you will get in touch with me afterwards if it would be helpful. So I'm Sarah, I'm the nurse at Compassion in Dying, and I've been at the charity for about 4 years now. I'm going to talk about what Compassion in Dying do, the support we provide, and in particular, the importance of planning ahead if you've got strong feelings about what it is you want towards the end of life. I'm also going to touch on some of those barriers that you may face. Rhiannon's touched on those already, but I think there are some more as well, especially if you're younger. And I'll finish up with a brief summary of some of the tools that you can put in place to formally document what it is you do and do not want for that time, because whilst there's great emphasis on having the conversation out there, especially in the end of life sector, I think we feel at Compassion in Dying that we're sort of doing people a disservice if we don't encourage people who feel strongly to back that up with some formal documentation. So I'm going to move on now to talk a bit more about Compassion in Dying. So we're a national charity and we help people to plan ahead for the end of life. It's really important that people get the care that's right for them, and that is our vision at Compassion in Dying. At the moment, unfortunately, not enough people have these conversations, and end-of-life care can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. If you don't have these conversations, sadly, that's inevitably what's going to happen. People will make assumptions about what's important to you and what you want. So far, we've supported about 70,000 people, and our services are getting busier all the time. So I'm going to move on to talk about our services in more detail and what we offer at Compassion in Dying. So I run this free nurse-led information line that's currently open 11 to 4 on weekdays. And we respond to emails and letters too. So we don't provide face-to-face support, it is all on the phone. And we are the leading provider of advanced decision forms. I'm going to explain what they are later. And we also provide professional training for healthcare professionals around this subject. We've also got lots of other services. I won't go into all of them, but we also now have a new peer navigator. It's so important that people have support from people who actually know personally what these experiences are like. So she is living with a long-term condition, and she supports people to sort of circumvent and navigate some of the problems you can have with planning for your treatment and care, not just the end of life. So in terms of the value of planning ahead, I mean, Rhiannon has said some amazing things already, especially the fact that not only does it help you to have the end of life that you would want, it also helps your family. We know that the incidence of complicated grief, sadly, is much higher when people haven't had these conversations, because sadly, no one then knew what it is those people wanted. And it just stops people feeling like they're left guessing what it is you want. It offers clarity, it takes away that ambiguity. And I think at these really important times, that is so essential. As you know, I'm a nurse, and when I work clinically, it's incredibly difficult in either a hospice or hospital environment when you have big groups of family members all coming at you with different opinions about what that person would have wanted. When you don't know that person, how do you navigate that? So when you have this clear planning in place, that's removed entirely. And that really is, as Rhiannon said, it's a gift, because you don't need that added complication at this very important time. It's just not very helpful. I think also with a diagnosis, especially like cancer, control is often taken from you in so many different ways, and that's tough. It's really tough. And advanced care planning is a way of you retaining control, because there may come a time when you can't make decisions anymore. But if you've outlined in legally binding documents what it is you want, or you've specified your preference about where you want to be cared for, that actually helps you to achieve that and helps you to remain in control and at the centre of decisions made. So again, like Rhiannon said, it offers that peace of mind so you can get on well with living now. You can have it all in place. You know whether it's needed now, in a few months, in a few years, that documentation is done. And it also means that you're not having that repeated conversation every time you're admitted to hospital or every time you see a healthcare professional, because these are really important conversations, but you don't need to be having them over and over again. It's so helpful just to have it documented and clearly understood by everyone involved in your care. So there are so many practical and emotive reasons why this really, really helps. And so many people would say to me, it doesn't feel morbid. It doesn't feel miserable. It actually just makes them feel like they've retained control and they have that sense of peace of mind. I would say people say that to me on almost a daily basis. It just lifts a weight off them. So I think these are really, really important things to bear in mind. However, there are significant barriers to planning ahead and having conversations around the end of life. There are some really obvious reasons. No one wants to have these conversations. Quite often, it's pretty tough. I don't like, or we don't like at Compassion in Dying to frame these as difficult conversations. We like to say that they're important, because if you come at this subject with that viewpoint that it's difficult, that it's almost negative, that's unhelpful. So we view them as important conversations, but sadly, not enough of the time are people initiating these. So if it's important to you, again, as Rhiannon so brilliantly said, initiate it. If you wait for someone to bring this up with you, it may never happen. We actually polled people at Compassion in Dying a few years ago. We polled terminally ill people. So everyone should plan ahead, but if you're terminally ill, it's probably more important. And when we asked them if anyone's raised the subject of what they would want if their condition progressed, only 16% of them had been asked that. So I think that really helps to sort of demonstrate what a problem we have here. So the message here really is, if you want to have this conversation, you're probably going to need to initiate it. But people don't. And I think that's often because people don't know what their options are. And they don't know that their family can't necessarily step in and make decisions for them. Often they can, often they do. And they're involved adequately in decision making, but sadly, my perspective at Compassion in Dying is that I will often speak to and support people who aren't being adequately involved, who aren't being able to advocate for family members or loved ones the way they want to, and that's so tough, because it's at that point they realise they've got no legal authority to make decisions. They must be involved, but they don't have the final decision making authority. And so a common situation that comes up is, maybe their loved one who's ill has said that I draw the line at maybe tube feeding. If I've lost the ability to make decisions, if things have progressed, I don't want that tube feeding. And then the professional clinical team is saying that's what we're going to do. And they say, no, they don't want that, so don't do that. But they do it anyway, because that's what they think is best. So it's just a kind of example of how that planning, again, empowers your family and supports them to make decisions for you and advocate for you, because these situations actually arise quite a lot. It's really sad and it's really difficult to support them. We find ways of supporting them as best we can, but with planning in place, formal documentation makes that all so much easier. Those situations don't really even arise as a result as much. So it's really important to bear that in mind. I think a lot of people think that solicitors need to be involved for these processes, and they just aren't. That's a financial barrier for so many people, and it's not required. It's not the case. So I think that's a really important message to get out there. Sadly, there is actually quite a lot of misinformation out there, even amongst healthcare professionals. So if you want to know the kind of accurate reality around what's required for planning ahead, I urge you to call us. Actually, we have a very good policy and legal team. We know what we're talking about, and whilst not to take away from what your healthcare professionals do and what they're capable of, actually there is a lot of misinformation out there. So you need to know what the facts are and what you need to do and what is required for planning ahead, because that information might not land at your feet. again, Rhiannon said this as well, like everyone's sort of worried about upsetting everyone else. And that definitely is the case for healthcare professionals. And I think that echoes my experience working clinically as well. I think when you're really busy, we have a very stretched, very stretched and busy healthcare service now, more than ever. When you're really busy and you don't have very good training on this subject, it's very difficult to engage in these subjects and these really important conversations. And then on top of that, if you're speaking to people who are in their 20s, 30s and 40s, it adds an extra layer of sadness to the whole situation. But it's their job to do this, and you deserve this information. However, with our stretch service, I would say it's so important that you look for the services out there that are filling the support and information gaps that we have. This is by no means criticising our NHS, but it is a really difficult time for the health service. So you need to know where you can get the support. I mean, I would urge you to get in touch with me, but again, like Rhiannon mentioned, Maggie's, they are an amazing service for people with cancer, and they are able to do so much and actually provide that hands-on help. So knowing what these services are ahead of time is, I think, is very valuable. And I think one last thing I would like to say is that when people talk about sort of getting their affairs in order and planning for the end of life, they invariably focus on finances and or kind of the post-death kind of planning. So people often say, oh, I've done my planning, I've planned my funeral, I've done my will, and I've got a finance power of attorney in place, which sort of sadly doesn't focus at all on the dying phase or a potential loss of decision-making capacity, which sadly happens. So I would urge you to think about what planning actually means for, for that dying phase, and for a potential time if you can't make decisions, think about who you'd want to make decisions, what you would want to happen, and documenting for that time as well. Because we do find it easier to, I think, as a country, we have a bit of a problem with focusing on the really difficult stuff, and we tend to focus much more on finance and post-death. Dying, just isn't a taboo it used to be, and actually there are people really willing to have those conversations. So if you want to have them, please do, because the people like us at Compassion, we're really willing to help you get that planning in place. So I'd like to talk now about person-led advanced care planning tools that you can complete to document your wishes, especially with regards to the end of life. There are other tools that I'll talk about a little bit as well, but these are the person-led tools. So things you can do for yourself that don't require the involvement of healthcare professionals or solicitors. So first of all, lasting power of attorney for health and welfare. I've mentioned already that your next of kin don't have legal authority to make decisions for you. So if it makes you comfortable to know that your family will have an authority when it comes to decision making, this is a really important document to have in place. You can choose one or more people. You can have a number of people as your attorneys if you want. You must really trust them, and they must really understand what it is you want. So you don't put this in place and then that's it. You need to talk to them. They need to know what you want. It costs £82. And as I say, you don't need a solicitor. You can use one if you want to. If it makes you feel better, fine, but it's not a requirement. So if that would financially be a barrier for you, it's important that you know that. However, there are significant COVID delays. So this takes months at the moment, I mean, maybe like 5 months at least. So you can't have a reactive sort of response to sort of worsening health when it comes to things like advanced care planning. It needs to be done in advance so that it's ready when a situation occurs. When people wait for acute sort of times with their health, it's often too late to then put these things in place. So if you have doctors saying to you, oh, we're not there yet, you don't need to worry, that's not actually right, because the point of these things is you get them in place well in advance and then you sort of forget about them until they're needed. Another tool, this is sort of a huge part of what we do at Compassion in Dying, is we provide advanced decision forms. They're also known as a living will or advanced directives. It's really unhelpful, there's all these multiple terms, but they're all the same thing, and these are legally binding refusal of treatment forms. So for some people, and it's not for everybody. Some people want to know that if they lose capacity and they're unlikely to regain capacity, which is the ability to make and communicate decisions, they want to know that they've documented what treatments they don't want. And that's something that lots of people feel very comfortable having in place. So they're legally binding, they're free to complete, and I will help you do that. That's sort of a huge part, as I said, of what I do. And then lastly, the final document we tend to support people with at Compassion is the advance statement. So it's not a legally binding document. It does have what we'd say legal weight, so it should be referred to. And it's an amazing opportunity really to document what it is you would or wouldn't want with regards to your care, where you'd want to be, if you have a religion that's important to you, if you'd rather be in a hospice or at home rather than in a hospital, all these things. It's great to have it documented somewhere. I really saw the value of these during COVID when family couldn't be as involved, when people were admitted or were having kind of quite critical times with their illness. If there's something written in your own words by you, that's quite a powerful document. And they also really help to reinforce those other two documents, the power of attorney form and the advance decision. It's like kind of context and extra kind of explanation of why those things are in place. There are other documents out there that people complete. So clinician-led tools, the things that your doctors or your healthcare team put in place for you. These can be in addition to or instead of, it's up to you. It's not really a case of one or the other. So some people have respect forms, you could have a do not attempt resuscitation form. It really depends on your area. We don't have a very good sort of UK-wide system. It varies from sort of place to place. But it's fine to have whatever of these you want in place. If you feel strongly, something documented will help ensure that what you want is known about and can be followed when it's needed. So my next slide is, I just have two quotes from people that we've supported at Compassion in Dying. The first one is from Rebecca, and I just think this is really powerful. And she said that she's got a respect form and an advance decision. She's young, so she said, I may live until I'm 40, I may live till I'm 80, but what's important to me is that I die peacefully. My paperwork is not a wish to die, but a wish not to suffer. I feel comforted knowing that there won't be a discussion at a highly stressful time where anything to happen to me. So it basically just encapsulates in a far better way than I ever did in that talk why it's so important to plan ahead and have these things in place. And I think that it's just a brilliant quote, so I'm glad to share that with you. And then secondly, this lady has said that she believes her husband's death, although it was far from easy, was easier than it would have been because he had an advanced decision. He had more control and was able to stay at home with his friends and family around him because of this. There can be pushback to what your family think you would want when these formal documents aren't in place. And I think my intention isn't to scaremonger, but just to kind of bring that into consciousness, to be aware of that, because if you have strong feelings, as I've said so many times, it's so important that they're known about and those wishes can be followed. And then here's just a slide with some images of our documents and the kind of publications we send people for free. And I'd like to bring your attention actually to the What Now booklet. Now, this was developed for people who have a terminal diagnosis. Lots of people who aren't terminally ill actually use this. And we wrote it in collaboration with people who are either terminally ill or had cared for people who are terminally ill. And sort of include things like useful conversations, what they wish they'd known at the time when they were going through the situation. And a lot of people say it's really helpful. It's got questions to ask your doctor and sort of supportive guidance in there. And a lot of people, it's one of our most popular booklets. A lot of people really value having that. And more we're providing sort of GP surgeries and so on with this as well. And then lastly, I would just like to say again, if you want to get in touch with me or a member of the team, these are our details. So the information line number and then the email, which is pretty much just managed by me and one other colleague. So if you want me to call you or get in touch and talk through these tools, then we can do. Really happy just to support you in whatever way would be helpful. And that's it.
Sarah, thank you. That was great. And that was just, I think, a really useful and important overview of things that people can do to make these conversations happen and for their wishes to be understood and acted on. So we have pre-recorded this, but we are going to be going live now, and Sarah and Rhiannon will be joining us. So please click on the Zoom link in your calendar, and you can join us for a conversation. We can have some time for questions and answers as well. And thanks so much for being with us.